Welcome to the Tuesday version of Juan's World, and this time in my new kitchen I'm actually going to do some cooking. I was debating for a while because I didn't have quite everything I needed to get started, including an idea. But I went to a furniture store and got some extra furniture, including a prep table for the kitchen. And you can see it here. It's kind of fake butcher block. I'm not going to actually use it for cutting. I've still got a cutting board. But here's the thing, and it's something it took me a long time to change to. Change is a subject I'm dealing with in my Friday videos, and I'm going to move it here as well too. That I was in the habit for many years of doing all my cutting and prep standing up. And sometimes when you're doing something like an elaborate fruit salad, it's a lot of peeling and dicing and what have you. And there's no need to stand up. You can sit down. So one of the things I do now is go to my prep table with a chair and sit down and do my cutting or whatever I have to do. If it's going to take a long time, if it's just going to be a few minutes, then of course I stand up. But if it's going to be 20, 30 minutes, then I sit down. And you'll see on this new prep table I also have some rice, including glutinous rice. And I got this yesterday after I had come back from the furniture store really aggravated because they hadn't delivered one piece and they were arguing about whether or not they should deliver it. And I decided, okay, we'll put that in the past and do some cooking. Now you'll see here that some of my cooking is absolutely standard, and I've done it before, like this apple crumble. I make apple crumble, or some kind of crumble, pretty much every week. And baked bread. I'll talk about baking bread in a later episode. But I also saw this glutinous rice. I was actually looking for basmati. Couldn't find it, but I found this instead. And I thought, okay, for Juan's World, we'll try risotto. And I'll make risotto ai funghi, which is mushroom risotto. And because I don't have the Italian mushrooms that I could normally use for risotto ai funghi, I have to use Asian mushrooms, and so that's where the chameleon cook part comes in. So let's get cooking. Now, last time when I was showing you my kitchen, I showed you the burners, and I promised that I would show you them in operation, and never did. I actually made the video, but then didn't edit it into the rest. So I'm going to do it now. So first of all, just this JPEG will show you the construction of the burner, and you'll see that it's gas, of course. Gas is much, much, much more versatile than electricity. And it has the capacity to hold a wok, which is very useful. Although I don't have a wok right now, I use a flat skillet. And the reason I don't have a wok is that I don't really feel the need to have one, because the shape, although it's important for stir fries and whatnot, is more for burners with very, very, very high heat. And this burner and the one in my last apartment, in fact, just about every one I've ever had, except for one of my apartments in China, have burners that don't get particularly hot or aren't particularly big. If you look in the kitchen in a Chinese restaurant, you'll see that they have huge jets that heat up the wok very, very quickly and get it to titanic heat very fast, and they can cook very, very quickly, and they need the shape of the wok to do it. These burners here in my apartment don't get very hot. Let me show you now. You see, it has an electronic ignition. It has a high flame, high enough for most stir fries in the skillet, and then it turns down to a nice simmer with a little central burner. So all in all, I'm pleased, but I would like it if it were hotter. Now let's move on to the actual making of risotto. Now, step one with risotto is making a broth, and in this case I'm using Asian black mushrooms and a little bit of chicken broth. And the really, really, really important part of risotto is to have enough broth simmering or keeping warm on the stove at all time, so that you can add it slowly, one ladleful at a time. And so here's the broth, and I'll add the mushrooms at a later stage. And now let's actually get into the cooking of the rice. All right, so let's get started with my risotto. And let's hope that this rice is like arborio rice. I've got it in the pan with some olive oil. I'm going to put it on a gentle heat. And I'm going to just coat the rice with the olive oil for a few minutes. Now, risotto in northern Italy comes in two different varieties. There's secco, which means dry, that is just like any rice dish that has really little or no liquid in it, and morbido, which means creamy and almost soupy, but very, very starchy, very glutinous. And I prefer morbido. So that's what I'm going to do here, I hope. This is my experiment in my new kitchen along with you. And the really tough part is that you have to just keep adding the broth slowly and cooking slowly, 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 until you get the exact consistency that you want. So you can see that the rice is now just coated and is, of course, it's not cooking and I don't want to brown it, I'm going to add 1 ladle of broth. I'm keeping the broth at an even temperature because I don't want the rice to cook too fast or too slowly, just very gently. That's too fast. I'll slow it down. Adding a little bit more. Now I'm not going to show you all of this because it would take too long. It's probably going to take up to an hour, certainly 40 minutes. I don't want to have you just sitting there watching rice slowly cooking. Anyway, that's just about the right speed. You can see it's like simmering gently. I have to keep worrying it around. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it cook, and the rice is going to absorb the broth, and as it absorbs the broth it's going to dry out, and I'm going to add another ladle or 2 of broth and keep going until it's reached the consistency I want. Now, really fabulous Italian risotto makers have been making risotto all of their lives. I haven't been making it all of my life, but I have been making it for about 20 years. So I have a pretty good idea of what I'm doing, and of course I've lived in Italy, I've watched Italian chefs, I've experimented over the years. What I don't know is how this Asian rice is going to work. The Italian arborio rice, of course, I know fairly well. Okay, now this is cooking just a little bit too fast. Add a little more broth. And I'm not going to keep doing this with you watching. I'm going to keep cooking, and we can come back maybe in about 10 minutes and you can see my progress at that point. Okay, just about 10 minutes along, and you can see that the grains are beginning to swell a little bit, and you can see I've got just a small amount of liquid in here. I'm going to add another ladle full. I want to try to keep the balance between the grains and the broth about even, so that as the rice absorbs the broth, there is still a little bit left, but not a whole lot, because I don't want it soupy, I want it creamy. And that's the really delicate, difficult part. That's what takes all of the patience and energy and experience. So I'm just going to add another ladleful and give it another stir around. You've got to keep, this is the thing, you've got to just keep moving it all the time. And I'll be back in another 10 minutes and we'll see our progress, okay? So now you can see I added the mushrooms from the stock, and now the rice is certainly beginning to plump more. And And this is the stage where we have to be even more careful. You can see that's a little too soupy right now, which I'm okay with because the rice isn't really in any sense cooked yet, so it's going to absorb most of it. But I have to be careful. I don't want to be getting to the end point and adding too much and having it turn into rice soup. I need it to become creamy, so I'm going to get more and more careful about the amount that I add and how often I add it. But for the moment we're doing all right. And at some point in the not too distant future I'm going to start having a little taste of the rice to see how it's coming in terms of its consistency, because I want it to be al dente. I don't want it to be rice pudding. That's the trick, if you like, secret, whatever word you want to use, with Italian cooking, with pasta or with rice, is to taste as you do with any kind of soup or stew. But in the case of pasta and rice, to bite, and make sure that when you're getting really close, that you don't go over the edge. Now we're getting to a delicate stage where the rice is very nearly cooked, and I don't want to add too much more broth because I want the starch to cream up the liquid that's in there right now. And you can see how it's looking pretty good. Now, an awful lot of my friends in Mantova prefer risotto secco. Northern Italy is famous for its rice, of course, and both Lombardy and Tuscany have their various forms of risotto, and individuals all have their various preferences. Almost all of my friends preferred secco. They didn't understand quite why I liked morbido. There you can see I need the liquid to just boil off a little bit. I'm going to keep tasting the grains, and then I'm going to have dinner. Almost ready. That was actually a bit shorter than I normally cook, about 35 minutes. I'm not really sure. I know that the broth tastes very good. Whether the rice is quite the way I want it, I don't know. And you can see it's almost there, and what I have to do is make sure it doesn't stick, but I do want the broth to mostly either be absorbed or evaporate, so that I'm left with a creamy residual risotto. Okay, so here we are at the very tail end, just about ready to go. You can see how creamy it is. The grains are cooked, and I just want to get a little bit more of a reduction, but I have to keep stirring. So there you have it. I'm now almost ready to plate up. You can see that the broth has turned into a beautiful creamy consistency with the rice, and it tastes just delicious. I'm sorry you can't taste it. Porcini mushrooms would have a different taste to these Asian black mushrooms, but it works wonderfully for the chameleon cook. So, I don't know if you're quite ready to do your own risotto at this point. It takes a lot of practice, but if you like my video, then by all means tell your friends, like and subscribe, and I'll see you on Friday for another edition of Change in Your Life. Now you can see I've changed to a new kitchen without too much pain, and I'll see you on Friday.